Hello and welcome to the Integrated Cyber's webinar series. Today's webinar is focused on managing your largest cyber risk, your own employees. My name is Kevin Thomas. I lead the marketing efforts for Integrated Cyber. And I'm joined today by Pete Kowalczyk, who's the president of Integrated Cyber, has a real deep background in IT services and managed security services. And then also joining me is Sai Venkataraman, who is the co-founder and CEO of Security Advisor. Sai also brings a wealth of experience in the security space, and the two of them will be sharing insights to today's conversation. You know, let's face it, every day you're facing challenges, and what's frustrating is that the majority of our vulnerabilities that we face actually come from our own employees. However, when you peel this back, it kind of makes sense. With our employees and contractors having access to our company's network, our resources, they receive lots of emails from both inside and outside the company, and they actually end up visiting a lot of external websites to do their jobs, and actually sometimes on their spare time. And in doing so, it's actually our employees who inadvertently create the most risk and invite the most active cyber threats to our company. Now, while insider threats, whether they're intentionally malicious behavior on the part of the employee, are real and they're very serious, the vast majority of what we actually see from employee incidents are actually unintentional and they're not malicious. So today we're focused on how to address employee-centric vulnerabilities and incidents, how to both protect our businesses while also, really important, while also creating a culture of employee awareness and accountability that reduces the number of incidences. We'll share stories, best practices, and solutions that might help you and your business reduce your risk. Here's the key point that we want to leave you with today. You're not alone. You know, this is a universal problem, but there's some excellent solutions and practices that we can follow. Now, Sai, you decided actually to start a company focused in this area around employees and vulnerabilities and issues that they create. Kind of why did you do that, and what have you seen from your experience?
Thanks. So the reason, three of us started this company. All three co-founders, we are working in McAfee in different senior roles. So I was focused on data security. My co-founder was running McAfee's core endpoint platform. The third co-founder was focused on cloud security. And we noticed that there were hundreds of thousands of cybersecurity incidents in an enterprise customer. Even a small customer would have thousands of cybersecurity incidents. And when we looked at the data, we found that almost 90% of incidents had a human root cause. And when we looked at the data further, we could actually see that we could figure out the root cause, why people were falling for phishing scams, why people were clicking on things, why people were installing different things or using USB devices. So by looking at the data, we found that we could see who was risky, what things they were doing, and we could also see that the biggest root cause for cybersecurity incidents were human actions. And that's why we started our company and focused on this area, because even a small difference can actually can result in a big reduction in cybersecurity risk for organizations.
Wow, it's interesting. Pete, is we often hear, which is quite interesting from clients, is that, hey, I've invested in endpoint protection, firewalls, network intrusion prevention systems. Isn't that enough to protect my business?
Yeah, that's, first of all, good question, and it's a very common question, Kevin. Unfortunately, I'd even say it's a common misconception as well. And what we have seen is that the companies, I'll say, with the least employee-generated problems, whereby the employee-generated problems are, as I said, the majority, that they've invested in a balance across the three areas that are depicted on this slide. So first of all, prevention, of course, right? We need to lock the doors and make it harder to get in. That is table stakes. But in addition to prevention, you need to detect, detection and response, because things will get through, right? There is no such thing as 100% protection, especially when sometimes it's not an evil person breaking through the door, your own employees let them in, okay? So things will get through, and when they do, they need to be addressed. But the most successful companies add this number 3, which is really the subject of today's conversation: a focus on the employee's behavior, right? On the employees themselves, around their awareness and their accountability and their role in prevention. And it's that last piece that we most often see is the missing element for many companies. Now, ironically, I'd say it's the only thing that a company can directly impact, right? You cannot stop the bad guys from attacking. You cannot send a message and request that the bots don't try, okay? It will happen. You can, however, make a significant dent in a number of self-generated threats by your own employees. And again, that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, all 3 of these areas need attention. That's the thesis, I think, of today's conversation. And more importantly, they need to work together. They need to be integrated, thus our name. They feed each other. They learn from each other. Now, we're going to go into each of these elements quickly, separately, before diving into number 3, specifically how employee-centric programs can transform your cyber risk. Next slide, if you don't mind. So as we discussed, the first line, I would say, always needs to be prevention, right? Threats are advancing fast. By the way, as fast as preventative measures are advancing, and sometimes even faster. And we recognize that many businesses feel the need to tighten their preventative security. It is a big investment, and I think it's intuitively obvious that that's the place to start. Now, the challenge we have is too often, and I have seen this, cybersecurity teams tend to over-prevent, if I could use that word, and in doing so unintentionally impact productivity, innovation, and sometimes even employee satisfaction. And the reality is modern employees, let's be honest, embrace new tools. They embrace new practices much differently than previous generations. And it is a reality. It can frustrate perhaps some, but it is a reality that we have to face. And I think the challenge most companies have is, if you're too constrictive, right, what happens is the most capable employees will, they'll find a way to bypass preventative measures. They do. We've seen it. And or 2, they leave. Neither of which are particularly good. And again, especially dependent on the roles, the most advanced, capable, high-tech employees are often the ones you need the most. Now, the corollary is not constrictive enough, and the door is wide open to a new generation of threats. And these threats are asteroid events at times, right? A ransomware can absolutely cripple a small company. Some of these threats propagate so quickly, they absolutely could jeopardize the economic health of a company very quickly. And I guess related to that, the other thing I'd say is a related pitfall is we see, especially in prevention, a one-size-fits-all trap. And I think one best practice I would share here is, prevention policies work best when they're segmented, right? By role, by business function, maybe even by location. Frankly, not all employees are the same. Not all employees generate the same amount of risk or have access to the same resources. So again, balance in prevention is key. But in all cases, again, the subject of today, our strong belief is that employees not only can, but should be part of the preventative defense and not the reason for it. In other words, they're not the enemy. We need to get them on our side so that they are actually part of the defense, and again, not the reason for it. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, let's shift now to detection and response. First key bullet, yes, we need some degree of prevention, but things will happen, right? We also need to detect and resolve incidents before significant harm because they will happen. And it's not a question of if, it really is only a question of when and how often. There's always what you would call leakage in your preventative measures. And again, the employees themselves are a major example. Now, with modern detection and response capabilities, dangerous threats, including those caused by our employees, they can be addressed. AI-enabled detection more accurately detects threats with a far lower false positive and false negative rate. Auto containment and auto remediation can even resolve some of those threats before they spread, and oftentimes without operator involvement. But it is still a game of numbers. And if you have too many threats coming in, even the best SOCs in the world will struggle to keep up. So we also need to figure out a way to reduce the number of threats to begin with. Now, that said, when threats happen, real-time detection and response is essential. Nobody can circumvent this. This is a critical leg of the stool. We need to put the fire out first and quickly before it spreads. And then we can worry about coaching the employees and avoiding it the next time. But this is about a game of milliseconds, detection and response. Now, at Integrated Cyber, we have, I think, integrated some of the best-in-class capabilities in this area. If anybody would like assistance, we are absolutely happy to talk about that at a future time. We recognize most companies are going to struggle with this. Advanced detection is hard to set up. And 7x24 SOCs are hard to operate, and many companies are going to struggle with that. So we are always there to help. But today's focus, I want to go back to the third leg of the stool, which is how do we create that self-correcting system of management and employee awareness and accountability so that the number of threats requiring real-time intervention is actually reduced. Next slide. So I'm going to pass it to Sai in a second. We're going to get to the heart of the webinar, and I'm very pleased to have Sai join us. Thank you. So as we shared, Sai is founder and CEO of one of our favorite cyber partners, Security Advisor. They enable this third critical aspect of our 360-degree cybersecurity service, and we have very proudly integrated their capability into our suite. Before handing it to Sai to tell some stories, share his experiences, I did want to highlight a few things that I'd like you to listen for as Sai describes what he's done, what he's learned, and what he's doing with us. First lesson is, this actually does need a capability. An automated solution is key. This is a game of facts and insights and repeatable measures. It's not simply a human process. It's not a training and learning program. We need a system to track and measure, because at the end of the day, what we're creating is a self-correcting culture that requires fact-based and measurable insights. Number two, but it is also not just a technology, okay? Companies that create a cyber awareness program enabled by the technology achieve the most significant results, right? So this is both the human element and the technology element. Number three, and this is, I'm sure Sai will tell us some great stories, but intuitively we all know, because we have all sat through those mandatory yearly cyber training classes for 4 hours. Thankfully, when they went online, we figured out how to click ahead so that we could get through it in 3. But that is not how people learn. We know that. People learn best when the subject is contextual, relevant, timely, and realistically in smaller bites. We all have a little bit of attention deficit disorder, I think. So that's a really important part of this, which is learning and awareness and coaching is key, but you have to do it, again, relevant, timely, and in smaller bites. I think number 4 is also equally important, which is, one has to approach this with a belief that employees generally want to do the right thing, that the majority of employee-created incidents are not malicious. but that they haven't connected the dots yet between their actions and perhaps the company consequences, how bad it could be. I think most companies, if they were aware that random clicking could actually make them unemployed because the company goes bankrupt after a major breach, they would be more careful. So it's that philosophy around which we're approaching this. Empowering them, coaching them. It's a far more effective way to get them on your side, and that's exactly what we want to do. Now, while the employee is key, managers actually play an even more critical role. So let me talk about that in a second. So, by the way, many of the insights we find, they only go to managers. Now you're wondering, hey, this is about empowering employees. Why would we do that? So first of all, some things we see and have seen, some observations might in fact uncover a legitimate employee problem, the proverbial insider threat. And sometimes it's quite sensitive. Sometimes a person with a lot of authority is the one creating the biggest problem, and one needs to be delicate. Oh, and by the way, sometimes what we will uncover is a flaw in a company's cyber defense. And the last thing you want to do is advertise that. You want to quickly get to the right people and close the doors. So another, and I guess the final case is in spam campaigns is a great example. They often target phishing campaigns, and spam campaigns actually target named executives in a company. Very easy to get a list off of a website, very easy to figure out what their emails might be, and they are targets. And it's not really something they did. It's not their fault, but they are a target. That's a great example where management looking at the data first can figure out how to approach it. But ultimately, our goal is to create, right, an employee ecosystem where they are accountable, they are aware, an ecosystem of management involvement where they are accountable and they are aware, and sort of creating a network of cyber advocates beyond the lonely office of the CISO, so that cyber is owned by everyone in the company. That is where we're trying to head, and that's where we can help. And with that, I'm going to pass it to our friend Sai. Sai, take it away.
Thanks, Pete. So let me actually double click into what Pete just said with a few different customer examples. Let's take one of our customer examples. At one of our customers, the web gateway, the Blue Coat web gateway actually found that IP address A, 102.1.1 something, found hundreds of incidents over the period of a year where this IP address was trying to access risky websites. What we do is, what would be effective is when we can actually map this IP address to Fred from accounting. This IP address is actually a human who has a tendency to do things online that is risky. And so, step one of a holistic human strategy, much like Pete said, is about identifying risky individuals. Not all humans are equally risky. In most organizations, we find that 5 to 10% of users account for like 90% of incidents. Today, most CISOs, CIOs, when they think about employee engagement, there's the annual training, but the annual training is the same for all employees. Even worse, all employees have to spend an hour on this annual training. That's 1 hour of time, at $30 an hour, that's actual money. So what we recommend is not all employees are risky. Can we identify the 5 to 10% of employees who are higher risk? And can we reduce the time that other employees spend on cybersecurity training? So in this case, Fred has a tendency to click on risky links, and Fred has been doing that over several months. Symantec or Blue Coat or Broadcom, they're doing a good job. They're blocking these incidents, but then they're not changing the underlying behavior. And that's what any human strategy is about. It's about building cyber immune cultures. It's about changing behavior. So how do we break this vicious circle? The way we can break this vicious cycle is through an engagement with Fred, where we can ping Fred through Slack or by sending a personalized note on email and say, hey, Fred, we've noticed these incidents, and here's a quick tip for you to avoid online incidents. And we find that more often than not, such tips work. They can be friendly, they can be automated, And the goal is, can we actually drive a measurable reduction in cybersecurity incidents through personalized tips? Let's take another example. We talked about how, someone is risky from an online standpoint. Just like that, we can say, hey, Mr. CIO, do you know your own team is being targeted with credential phishing attacks? This is because IT teams, security teams, often are privileged administrators. And if hackers can get their credentials, they get access to a treasure trove of data. And again, we can personalize these insights by department. This is something that Pete talked about. IT teams are often targeted, leaders are often targeted. And so can we get department level insights by hooking into data that security teams already collect? An average security team has at least 10 tools: email gateways, web gateways, Active Directory, identity solutions, endpoint security. Each of these tools have a lot of data which can give us insights about risk. Can we use that risk? Let's take another example. We are seeing a lot of invoice scams today where finance teams are being targeted with invoice scams or mails from authority figures, CEOs. And a lot of these hackers use human cognitive bias. As humans, we tend to respond more quickly to authority figures. So if a CEO sends a finance guy an email saying, hey, pay this invoice, there's a chance the finance person follows through. And so, hackers use these biases. And can we as a security team reverse this process and give employees gentle little nudges that make sure that that these biases can be managed better? Yet another story, with one of our customers, we found that some of their contractors were behaving unusually. With a lot of our customers, we find that specific personas, this is something Pete talked about as well, specific personas are higher risk. Contractors are often temporary, they're not trained, and in many cases, they may be, on an average, slightly more risky. So can we engage with contractors and work with them to reduce risk? And engineering, yet another example was we found in a customer, engineers a bunch of engineers who had not turned on multi-factor authentication. So security tips need not always be about avoiding risk. Can we give them tips about turning on multi-factor authentication, using encryption, or using rights management? These stories, the point of all these stories is that, just like Pete said, a holistic approach is required to fortifying humans. And this holistic approach involves using data. Like the slide shows, the first step of any holistic human cyber risk reduction project is about analytics. It's about looking at your data and figuring out what we call our teachable moments. Once we have those teachable moments, can we deliver tips to these end users, nudges to these end users? And by nudges, we mean, pop-ups, gentle pop-ups, or 1-minute videos, nothing that takes more than 2 minutes of their time. And it's only once a month. We don't use too much of employee time because employees have their regular job. Can we do this in a way that that saves time for employees and yet changes behavior? And finally, we talked about the vicious cycle, and the key to breaking that vicious cycle is to measure outcomes. Fred from accounting had hundreds of incidents over the last 6 months, but after we gave him tip number 1, his per month incident rate dropped by 99%. After 2 months, Fred stopped generating incidents. That's a great result story for Fred, for the security organization, and for the organization overall, where they can say month on month, the overall number of cybersecurity incidents went down. These many risky users stopped being risky. And it's something that helps the CISO demonstrate ROI on their investment, not just in the human side, but also in technology. So, let me now talk about the right-hand side of this slide. The beauty about our integration with integrated cyber is that we are now hooked into their detect and prevent tools. And management, we can give them regular reports on analytics and teachable moments, but also outcomes. And employees get personal coaching. And it's bite-sized. It does not take too much of their time. And of course, things that are required for compliance, like phishing simulations, we do that as well. Can we go to the next slide, Kevin?
A quick question for you, Sai, that came in. When you look at Fred with his example in that activity, are there 2 things that are happening like Pete talked about? Is it Fred that's being pinged with a notification alerting him of his activity, and his management team? How could you double click down into that a little bit?
Sure. So the tool is configurable. We can have policy settings where first it runs on visibility mode and only the administrator gets notified on what are the top 5, who are the top risky users, what are the top 5 incidents. We can run in that mode. But at full deployment, it is indeed Fred who's being notified, where Fred sees an email or a Slack message or a Facebook workplace message that says, hey, Fred, here's a quick cybersecurity tip for you. And so the intent is to be an advisor to Fred with friendly tips. And there's also an escalation process. So if we see that Fred has not viewed the video or Fred continues to generate incidents, as an escalation mechanism, we can, in reminder number 2, CC Fred's manager or CC Fred's department head. And if everything fails after 3-4 reminders and Fred remains risky, then in that case, this is an API-based tool. We can even send a note to the HR review system. So, there are a bunch of actions that are possible, including notifying the manager, notifying the security team, notifying Fred, or even, sending a line into the HR system. So there are several actions we can take, but the most important one is notifying Fred.
Yeah, and is Fred getting a notice saying, hey, Fred, last week you clicked on these links 27 times and it's causing a security risk? Is it displaying his quote unquote bad behavior so he knows what he's doing and then providing a tip on how to correct his behavior?
Exactly. And again, it's configurable. So some organizations like to be direct. Some organizations like to start with an indirect tip. And so what you said is possible.
How do you end up with a lot of this in automating and measuring? How do you teach people not to react to phishing attempts?
Yeah. So, the first thing is we have to identify the top 5 phishing scams in the organization. Is it a credential phishing scam? Is it an invoice scam? Once we know what are the top phishing scams, you can send them a tip or a poster that captures all this information. Or you can, email by nature is not the safest mechanism. You could use an off-band channel on something like a Slack and send them a tip. So the key is diagnosing what their most likely risk is from a phishing standpoint. And once we know that, can we do continuous education closer to real time as possible, where we send them posters, we send them comics, we send them videos to do it repetitively, continuously, and in a safe, trusted channel.
Do the phishing attacks, are they really targeted, the type of phishing attacks by each business, or is there also kind of an overlying trend we see across the industry with events that are taking place in an increased, or is it a combination of both? Hey, I want to go after this company for this reason, and there's this larger thing going on in society from a phishing perspective.
Yeah, it's both actually. For example, right now we are seeing a whole bunch of scams on coronavirus. A lot of employees are saying, the emails that are purportedly from the WHO, supposedly signed by the Director General, and saying, click here to know more. So there's a bunch. Hackers use everything. Hackers use what's going on right now. They use a bunch of biases, recency effect, optimist. Hey, here's a job offer for you. Here's free things. Here are cute things. They use human psychology to target employees. Some scams are industry specific. Hey, here's from your supplier, cable manufacturer, things like that. So there's industry specific trends. There's overarching trends that impact all of society. Sometimes it's even personal. Finance employee working in the procurement department, can we target them with specific types of emails? Couriers. So you see all of these, a whole bunch of scams with specific numbers claiming to be from couriers, DHL, FedEx scams, ADP scams, HR system scams, Amazon gift card. There are lots of things hackers use, and it's important to look at the organization, see the overarching trends for the industry and the world overall, use a combination, and treat and give users one or two simple things. Users cannot process too many things also, so you need to give them easy enough tips. And that's where the technology people integration that we talked about with that Pete talked about. Technology needs to stop 95% of threats, and we educate people and reduce the remaining 5%.
Excellent, thanks.
So let's this is an actual example with a Bay Area customer. And when we started working with this customer, this was an innovation-focused organization. They hated blocking anything. They were focused on their product releases. And so when we started working with them, a fairly high percentage of those users had incidents, but a small percentage of users, about 5% of their users, created like 90% of their incidents. Specifically, these were users who would go online, do all kinds of things. And so, they had Palo Alto traps deployed. They had G Suite deployed. They had Splunk deployed. So we could integrate with these sources. We could find personalized tips that we could deliver to these users. These more than 5 threads, users with more than 5 threads. And then we actually started tracking engagement with these users. We used email and Facebook Workplace to deliver these tips. And then we started seeing, hey, these users, do they read the emails we send them? Do they click on any of the training links we send them? Do they complete it? And most importantly, the chart on the left bottom, incidents associated with those users, is that reducing? And so over a period of 4 months, it started, these were incidents that Palo Alto Traps was picking up on. We found that by engaging with these high-risk users, we could actually generate a result story for the organization where the number of infections went down by 99% without putting in place hard blocks. So Pete talked about how we want to encourage innovation, productivity, and at the same time build a cybersecure culture. And that's exactly what happened in this case. First was building the baseline. Second was identifying the teachable moments. And once we figured those teachable moments, nudging users, giving users bite-sized tips. And what then happened was that a majority of these risky users became safe over a period of time. So this was a result story as measured by the EDR they had deployed, which is a detect and prevent system. Similarly, we can reduce the number of web violations. We can increase the number of people using rights management or encryption. We can reduce even, users who are vulnerable to things like spam or email malware. And so, the key is to measure. And it's also important that we are quite surgical with our approach. We focus on higher risk users and give them short tips that are not irritating. If we keep popping up, empirically, we found that if we ping users more than 3-4 times a month, they start ignoring you. So it's important that we ping them ideally once a month. And for the safe user, maybe not even once a month. And even once a month, we get them to spend a minute or two. That's it. And if you deliver it over a period of time, you can see user risk coming down. And there's a little bit of reinforcement you need to do.
How long does it take to typically see an impact and notice a difference as you look at these the implementation of these projects?
Yeah, it actually varies by the KPI you're tracking. Things like users who tend to get infected, we see results fairly quickly. Even in month 1, as you can see, there's a dip, and we've seen this across multiple customers. Over a 4 to 6 month period, you see a material difference, especially users who do things online, who have a tendency to click on things, there's probably 3-4% of users who would click on anything. And so we can actually focus on some of these users. Even if some of them become safe, there is a big change in the number of incidents. So I would say for most variables, a 3 to 4 month period, we can actually show a significant difference. Some other indirect variables like spam, leadership teams being targeted by spam, that's because their emails are in the public domain. So things like spam or being targeted with phishing attacks, even that through behavior, we can see some change, but it takes a longer period of time.
Yeah, so you've referenced the high-risk users. Do you see a trend across businesses that it's certain roles within companies, or are these just random people that maybe haven't paid attention during that 1 4-hour training at a prior company?
Yeah, high-risk users are 2 categories. One, high-risk users are risky because they're targeted quite often, and some users are risky because of their own behavior. There are certain roles which are targeted more often: finance, IT, leadership teams. So there are certain roles which are higher risk, but the underlying behavior, they're fairly random. In different companies, we see different roles being risky. It's not that tech-savvy users are less risky. Sometimes we find that tech-savvy users are more vulnerable because, they think they know it all and they click on things. So it is fairly random.
Interesting. So, Sai, appreciate that. Let's throw it back over to Pete. And as we're coming into the summaries, if folks have additional questions, there's a question bar on the side of your screen that you can plug them in, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can over the next 20 minutes or so.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Sai. Very interesting. So we want to get to some of the questions. We're already seeing a few that are interesting, and I'm sure Sai will have some great stories for us. So let me summarize some of the key points that hopefully you picked up as well. Number one, we believe all companies should implement a similar program focused on their employees' cyber behaviors. Okay? A program committed to this. And of course, augmented and supported by the technology that we described, but everything, right? The program, the awareness, the coaching, the training, the testing, the capabilities. Number two, we remain absolutely steadfast in our belief that employees will learn and will retain cyber awareness better if it's given to them in context, timely but not overly timely, bite-sized, relevant, right? We believe most employees want to do the right thing. They were actually just unaware of the potential damage that cyber is bringing. And one of the things we'd like to, eliminate is this secret society called cybersecurity, right? We have the secret handshakes, we have acronyms that no one knows what they mean. It's sort of secret, it's job security. And what we need to do is democratize cyber awareness, democratize the role of prevention and response, and basically make it everybody's problem, because we are all part of it. Number three, obviously, that management plays an important role, right? Employees are critical, managers are critical as well. Some things happen that need to be addressed more sensitively, and managers help with a little bit of authority, and managers also help the employees if they need a little bit of pushing. And that this virtuous cycle, and I love the term Sai has used, that this virtuous cycle is actually achievable if we teach, test, measure, and repeat, and do it on an ongoing basis. And I think, from our experience, different companies have different approaches to even the sequence. I know very recently with one customer, we were debating, should we announce that we're about to do a phishing test before we do it? Does that skew the results of the baseline? There's no perfect answer to that. I think it depends. I think in that particular case, we decided to simply test it first to establish a baseline, and then on a subsequent one to see whether in fact announcing made people more aware, more on alert, which by the way is still relevant. But again, it's a very human problem we're trying to solve. This is about employees' behavior. Sometimes they're in a rush, sometimes they're busy. I think we've all been in a situation where when your boss sends you an email late at night, the first thing you do is read it. Your pulse is raised, and you're probably more willing to click on things. And obviously, that's exactly what the bad guys are hoping for. So this is a human problem and needs to be dealt with a human perspective. Now, we at Integrated Cyber, with our partners like Sai, stand ready to help your company achieve these same breakthroughs. We'll help you put the program in place. We'll help you talk about the roles. We'll implement the capabilities. We'll connect it to incident detection and response. We'll connect it to your preventative tools. We'll help give you that full picture. But we really want you to consider looking at this third leg of the stool, and hoping we can help you do that. So with that, thank you, Sai. I already see a couple interesting questions coming in. So Kevin, let me pass it back to you, and let's ask away.
Okay, excellent. It's probably a question to you, Sai, which is, how can I measure the ROI of this type of program inside my organization?
Yeah, and the first thing we need to do is define those 15 variables ahead of time. maybe the first thing you can do is look at your own security logs. How many antivirus infections, how many DLP incidents, how many email malware users, how many users are receiving email malware or being targeted with email malware, how much spam. So if you can baseline those variables and then track it continuously over a period of 12 months and act on some of these variables, users who receive malware or who do things to get infected with malware, how do we stop that? How many users are reporting phishing emails? Can we run a program to help users report phishing emails more often? Start using tools like rights management, encryption. Again, all of this is trackable. So if we can define those 15 variables upfront and then track it over a period of time, and then celebrate those early wins. The chances are if you define a program, you start acting on it, and you actually act on it, and you're sending users tips, some of these variables will improve. And when they improve, you can actually send a newsletter to the organization celebrating your win. And it's a win for the cybersecurity team, for users as well. We often recommend a reward structure where users who are safe, you can send them Amazon gift cards, or you can recognize them in your newsletter. So building a culture where good behavior is rewarded, improvement is rewarded. If we can do all of that, again, it builds that culture. So, to answer your question, if you can define those KPIs and variables, measure it continuously, celebrate those early wins, that's the approach we recommend.
Is it safe to assume that as you've deployed this in organizations with that continuous cycle, the three legs of the stool, by changing the human behavior, you're then lessening the burden and workload on the other two legs of the stool, thus lightening the workload for your cyber teams, which we know are understaffed, under-budgeted, and overstressed? Have you seen that relief of pressure in the other two legs of the stool as this one's been deployed?
Yeah, let's take that case study we showed you. 10,000 EDR incidents per month going down to 135. To investigate 10,000 incidents, you need X individuals, but to investigate 135, you need significantly fewer resources on the SOC side. So as incidents go down, the probability of a breach goes down. The number of people you need investigating those incidents go down. So, if you can use your people and actually reduce incidents, the resources you need to investigate those incidents obviously go down too. So yes, there are savings, savings in terms of time, savings in terms of the number of people we need, other things that these people can focus on, and the probability of a reduced breach, which is also money in some way.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thanks. You would assume that, but I'm glad to see that we're actually seeing that prove itself out in the marketplace as well.
Yeah.
Pete, question for you. Is there a way to perform any kind of assessment before fully committing?
Yes, there is. In fact, quite often customers would at least like to do the equivalent of an initial baseline to see where they are, what they stand. Now, I will say that our POC is not free because there is work involved. There is work both in enabling the first test. There's work involved in setting it up in the first place to be able to ingest the logs and correlate it. And what we typically do is our trial for 30 days includes a combination of both management analytics, targeted coaching for at least the top, let's say, 100 or so employees, one phishing test. But yes, we are very happy to talk to anybody about setting that up. And in most cases, we would expect the companies to absolutely be shocked at what we find together and move forward in a broader program.
Excellent, thanks. Another question probably for you, Pete, which is, hey, I'm a small company. Do I really need to deploy more cyber tools if I have my prevention stuff in place and already deployed? I think you touched on that early, but if you can expand a little bit.
Yeah, that is a good question. And we do hear that a lot. And part of part of the challenge I think we all face in this industry is, the word cybersecurity or just security is used so often. yes, I have security. Yes, I'm secure. And the reason is, I have firewalls on my network, and I just deployed endpoint protection onto my laptops. As we said, we try to use the term preventative side because that is legitimate. It is on the prevention side, but it is insufficient. Now, that said, if I were a small company, yeah, I'd probably ask maybe my local MSP. I'm maybe already getting local help for my, running my servers or cloud or Office 365. I might ask them to make sure I'm preventatively secure. But most small companies, they're not in a position to go scouting the industry for best-in-class detection and response capabilities, never mind figuring out how to then integrate them into the rest of their infrastructure, and then worse yet, then set up and hire a 7x24 either follow the sun or multi-shift SOC. That's why businesses like Integrated Cyber can actually help them achieve that second and even third leg of the stool without them having to do all of the technology deployment themselves. They don't need to set up a SOC. We already have one. They don't need to implement the technology. We have already integrated those capabilities. We can just simply onboard them and take care of them. So my response would be no, none of the prevention side is sufficient. But on the other hand, the small companies or large companies are not alone in having to complete the rest of the cycle.
Well, and I think we've seen from studies lately that a lot of small businesses believe that ransomware, that hackers won't go after them because they're a small business.
Yeah,
that isn't the case.
Oh, by the way, I mean, so that's changed a lot just over the last even just 5 years, not just doubling, tripling, but exponentially. In the old days, we envisioned, let's admit it, we envisioned a teenage kid, typically a male with a hoodie sitting in his, mom's basement in some part of the world hacking us, right? That's where all the images, if you look online, all of the images are that same kid with a hoodie covering his face in somebody's dark basement. The reality is, I think they still exist. Now there are hundreds of them all lined up. But for the most part, the attacks are bots. It's automated. And bots don't care who you are when you're open. Bots don't sleep, bots don't care, and they are just pinging and crawling the network looking for exposure. They're going to send spam and phish. They're going to try to penetrate everything and everybody, equal opportunity employer. So the world has changed, and that argument that says I'm not Nike, right? I'm not Amazon or Procter & Gamble. I'm small. They don't care about me. The reality is a bot doesn't care. And therefore it could be an asteroid event for our small businesses. And that's part of the reason why we are very concerned and very focused on that particular segment of the market. They are as vulnerable as the big guy and a fraction prepared in comparison.
And what does a ransom do to them? Like the city of Cartersville recently, that paid a $380,000 ransom to get their systems back. What would that $380,000 do to a small business?
Well, again, whether it's ransomware or anything else, in most cases, right? So it could be, what if you as a small retailer have all of your customer information stolen? Big companies barely survive that. Small companies, that it truly is an asteroid event. Because of the material cost of potential legal issues and breach fees, but B, the loss of credibility, the trust factor that small companies absolutely require to stay in business. What is the most devastating to many companies is what happens after they clean up the breach. That loss of trust and confidence by their customer base, they may never recover. So we don't use the term asteroid event lightly, but for many small businesses, one ransomware event, one breach is potentially life-threatening.
Yeah, and I like the analogy that you used earlier about leaving the door open. And some employees just kind of forget to close the door and stuff comes in.
Yeah.
And it's that teaching and training that behavior. It's like having kids to say, make sure you close the door when you come in the house to keep us safe. And you never know what's going to fly through the door, and the more training you can do at that time. I think it's a fabulous investment on the front side that then pays its dividends on the backside, like Sai said about the efficiencies created in the other legs of the stool, yet alone keeping the business safe and in business, and operating and serving the customers like they're supposed to, and protecting their brand, which is an important aspect of what we need to do. We're coming up just about on the hour. We'll do one more question, and then Pete will go ahead and have you wrap it up. So I think question to you, which is all around how are the IT teams or the CISOs that you're dealing with going about getting approvals within their organizations for this type of tool?
Great. So, there are two types of buyers. Thanks, Kevin. That's a great question. There are two types of buyers. One is compliance. And when it comes to compliance, there are specific standards, NIST, ISO 27001, even GDPR, CCPA. The good news with all these regulations is that they all have a line or two in there which talk about human engagement. So from a pure compliance standpoint, engaging with your employees is actually necessary. And so, there's the compliance buyer, but more interestingly, there's the second type of buyer, and it depends on the category. A small and medium business, they often don't have a SIM or a SOC. And so we are many things to them. We are an analytics vendor. We provide outcomes. We provide awareness. And so, for a small, medium, or a mid-sized customer, we solve many little buckets from analytics, teachable moments, awareness, phishing simulation, and, the monthly dashboard. So depending, when we do that pilot, we identify the top 5 pain points. So when we work with customers, it's important that we solve their largest pain points. And that's where, Pete talked about the pilot. If you can identify their top 5 pain points and then help them solve those pain points, so it's much easier to get those approvals. When you can say, when a recent customer actually was breached, where, one of their employees, a privileged user, was targeted, and, it was a sophisticated scam, but it ultimately was because the employee shared their credentials. And they went ahead and they accessed some of the payroll systems and so on. So, if we can actually, before those things happen, if we can say these are likely your 5 top risks and we can help you solve that, then, the buying process is easier. So two types of buyers. One is the compliance buyer. For the compliance buyer, we check box for the compliance function, and then we do so much more at similar price points. And for the buyer with genuine pain points, we can help them identify and build stories around those pain points through our pilots, and then we can help solve it through our actual engagement. Did I answer the question, Kevin? Any additional thoughts, Pete and Kevin?
It's very good.
No, it's very good.
So Kevin, if I may, let me end there. Sai, thank you very much for sharing your stories, your wisdom. And as always, we enjoy, our partnership has been very rewarded. And I think to our audience, this is one area where not only can we help, we do have great capabilities. But it's one area where in the world of cyber, we don't have to be a victim and simply hope for the best. We can actually manage some aspect that has a material and measurable impact on our business risk. And as we started this conversation, I think most businesses intuitively appreciate the statement that says the majority of incidents originate with your employees. I think you would be shocked to see how true that is, and in fact, how most likely that number is underestimated. We stand by, ready to do both a trial and more importantly, stand by to help you actually implement this third leg of the stool. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin. Well moderated, and have a good day.
Thank you.